The hotel lobby looked like a palace that morning. The marble floor was shining. The tall glass doors opened and closed as guests came in, and the golden chandelier above filled the room with warm light. Staff members rushed here and there carrying luggage, serving drinks, and answering phones. But even in that busy scene, everyone noticed the moment a certain guest arrived. Mr. Li, a well-known Chinese millionaire, stepped through the glass doors. His presence changed the air in the room. He was not loud, he was not rude, but everyone knew who he was. His name had already been whispered among the staff for weeks. Some said he owned half the buildings on the east side of the city. Others said he had investments in dozens of countries. Whether the stories were true or not, one thing was certain. This man was important. The hotel manager, Mr. Carter, straightened his tie and hurried forward. His heart was already beating faster than normal. He had been waiting for this day. If he could impress Mr. Li, the hotel would receive more business from his company. That meant praise from the owners, bonuses, and maybe even a promotion. But if something went wrong, Carter didn't want to even think about it. Mr. Li walked slowly, his assistants following behind him like shadows. He carried himself with calm confidence, the way only people with great power and wealth can. He reached the front desk where a young receptionist smiled nervously. Mr. Li nodded politely, then began to speak. His words flowed out in Mandarin, fast, smooth, and confident. Carter froze. He had expected Mr. Li to know some English. Many rich clients did. But Mr. Li spoke only in Mandarin. His voice was deep and commanding, and it was clear he was giving instructions about his reservation. Carter glanced at the receptionist, who looked helpless. The staff exchanged nervous looks, their smiles stiff and uncertain. The lobby, once filled with the normal noise of movement, suddenly felt too quiet. Carter pulled out his phone quickly and opened a translation app. His hand shook a little as he tried to type the words he thought Mr. Li was saying. The app spoke back in broken, robotic English. Carter forced a laugh, pretending it was fine. But it wasn't fine. Mr. Li's face remained expressionless, but his assistants frowned. They whispered among themselves, also in Mandarin. To them, the hotel's inability to communicate must have looked unprofessional. To Carter, it felt like a disaster in the making. He tried again. "Sir, one moment, translation." His voice cracked. The millionaire's eyes narrowed slightly. He repeated his request, slower this time, but still in Mandarin. The staff nodded as if they understood, but in truth, they didn't. Carter wiped his forehead, feeling the sweat. In his mind, he saw everything collapsing. If this client left unhappy, the hotel's reputation would suffer. News might spread in business circles. Other wealthy clients might avoid them. Carter's career could sink with just one mistake. He looked around desperately for help. The assistant, managers were already flipping through phrase books, typing furiously into their phones, whispering panicked guesses. None of it worked. The silence grew heavy again. Guests in the lobby began to watch. Some smiled with curiosity, others frowned, sensing the tension. The hotel, which always prided itself on smooth service, now looked clumsy and unprepared. And in the middle of that storm stood Mr. Li, calm but firm, waiting to be understood. Carter's heart raced. His mouth went dry. This was the moment he had feared most, failing in front of someone who mattered so much. He forced another nervous smile, but his eyes betrayed his fear. He thought to himself, "If I cannot fix this now, I am finished." What Carter didn't know was that help was closer than he imagined. Help was standing just a few feet away, dressed in a simple janitor's uniform, holding a mop, quietly watching everything unfold. But for now, Carter only felt the panic rising inside him, and the weight of failure pressing heavily on his chest. The marble floor beneath Mr. Carter's polished shoes suddenly felt slippery, though it wasn't. His palms were wet, and his heart hammered against his ribs. Mr. Li's sharp eyes stayed fixed on him, and the silence that followed the failed translation attempt felt unbearable. The millionaire had repeated his request, clearly, slowly, as if speaking to a child. Carter understood nothing. The receptionist bit her lip, glancing nervously at Carter. One of the assistant managers rushed to the desk with a phrasebook, flipping pages in panic trying to find the right words. But Mandarin, with its tones and characters, was not something you could learn in 5 minutes. The poor man stammered, a few sounds that didn't even resemble Chinese. Mr. Lee's assistants raised their eyebrows in offense. A heavy sigh escaped from the older one, his arms crossing in irritation. The lobby, usually filled with soft piano music and the calm chatter of guests, now carried a strange tension. The music still played, but it sounded distant, almost mocking against the rising panic. Guests waiting in line began to turn, curious eyes watching. Some whispered, some smiled awkwardly, sensing something unusual was happening. Carter tried, again with the translation app. His hands trembled as he typed, and his phone produced a metallic voice that made everyone wince. The robotic Mandarin was so broken, it didn't even make sense. Mr. Lee's face, once neutral, now darkened. He spoke rapidly to his assistants, his voice low but firm, the kind of voice that carried power even when it was quiet. Carter forced himself to smile again, though it looked more like a grimace. His throat was dry. "Sir, please. One moment. Fix problem." His words were clumsy, and his fear was visible to everyone. He felt like a student standing in front of the class, unable to answer a teacher's question, except this time the teacher was a millionaire who could decide the hotel's future. Inside Carter's head, the thoughts clashed wildly. This can't happen. Not today. If he leaves angry, the owners will blame me. If he thinks we are unprofessional, he will never return. What if he tells others? What if it becomes news? My career, my position, everything I've worked for, it could vanish in one single mistake. One of the assistant managers tried to interrupt, holding out his phone with a translation. He bowed slightly to Mr. Lee and read aloud from the screen, but the pronunciation was terrible. The tones twisted the meaning into nonsense. Mr. Lee frowned harder, shaking his head. He waved his hand, impatient. His assistants began muttering, again their voices sharp and annoyed. Carter's knees felt weak. He tugged at his collar as if the air had turned heavy. He could feel the sweat sliding down the back of his neck. His face grew hot, and yet his hands were freezing cold. Every second stretched painfully, and the eyes of strangers in the lobby burned into him. To him, the scene looked like a slow-motion nightmare. The hotel, his pride, was collapsing in front of him. The reputation they had built with polished service and perfect manners was breaking apart in front of a single guest. And not just any guest. This was the kind of guest who mattered more than 100 ordinary ones. Mr. Lee finally spoke again, his Mandarin clipped and stern. Though Carter did not understand the words, he understood the tone. It was the tone of a man losing patience. The assistants leaned in, nodding quickly. One of them even checked his watch as if to say, "We do not have time for this nonsense." Carter's heart sank deeper. His lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in years, the confident manager felt powerless. He had been trained to deal with angry guests, late check-ins, overbookings, even emergencies. But none of that prepared him for this. A simple conversation that could not happen because of language. He glanced again at his team. They looked helpless, frightened, some even embarrassed. The receptionist stared at the desk, avoiding eye contact, ashamed at being unable to help. One of the bellboys stood frozen near the luggage cart, watching as if he was witnessing the slow sinking of a ship. The weight pressed down on Carter's chest. He wanted to scream, to call for a translator, to fix everything. But it was too late. The millionaire's expression had already turned cold. And yet, in the middle of that storm, in the crowd of useless phones and phrasebooks, there stood someone no one noticed. A man in a plain uniform, holding a mop, his eyes calm as he observed the chaos. He was just the janitor, to most invisible. But soon, very soon, he would be the one to break the silence. And when he did, the entire lobby would remember it forever. Mr. Carter's hands gripped the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him standing. His chest rose and fell quickly. Every time Mr. Lee spoke, Carter felt smaller, weaker, and more exposed. The millionaire's voice carried authority, not anger yet, but disappointment, the kind that hurt worse than shouting. The assistants beside, Mr. Lee whispered in fast Mandarin, their sharp tones slicing through the quiet lobby. Their glances darted toward the clock on the wall, then back at the confused hotel staff. To them, this was not just a delay, it was a sign of incompetence. Carter's mind raced for solutions. He thought of calling an emergency translator, but even that would take time. He thought of asking the head office for help, but that would make him look weak. He thought of apologizing, but without the right words, it might sound even more insulting. Each option led to failure.
The assistant manager leaned toward Carter and whispered, "Sir, maybe we can write down, use paper." Carter's eyes narrowed with frustration. He knew writing wouldn't help. He didn't know Mandarin characters, and Mr. Lee didn't know English ones. It was like trying to draw water with a broken cup. Hopeless. His throat tightened. He turned again to the translation app, clumsily typing words. But when the phone spoke, the sound was broken, robotic, and even worse than before. A guest standing nearby snorted, covering his mouth to hide a laugh. The sound stabbed Carter like a knife. Mr. Lee's assistants looked offended, as if the attempt at translation was childish. One of them muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. Carter didn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly what that look meant. This hotel is a mistake. The air in the lobby felt heavy now, suffocating. The chandelier's glow, once warm, now seemed to spotlight Carter's failure. The polished marble floor reflected his nervous movements, like a cruel mirror, showing him the image of a man who had lost control. He tugged at his tie. He swallowed hard, but his mouth was dry. He forced another weak smile, though inside he was falling apart. His career, his reputation, his pride. It all felt as if it were slipping through his fingers like sand. The staff around him grew restless. Some shuffled their feet, others avoided eye contact, pretending to be busy. Nobody wanted to be pulled into this disaster. They had all seen Mr. Carter handle difficult guests before, but now, for the first time, he looked powerless. The pressure was unbearable. Carter thought of the owners, the board, the investors. He imagined their angry faces when they heard that the millionaire had been offended. He imagined the cold email that would strip him of his position. The years of effort, the late nights, the sacrifices, all ending because of one language barrier. Mr. Lee spoke again, louder this time. His words were fast, filled with authority. The assistant straightened, nodding quickly. The sound of his voice filled the lobby, demanding respect, demanding competence. But Carter had nothing to offer. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Out. His mind was blank. For the first time in his career, he had no answer. The silence that followed felt like judgment. The eyes of the staff, the guests, even the marble walls seemed to accuse him. Carter's knees weakened. He thought he might collapse right there, in front of everyone. He wanted the ground to swallow him whole. And yet, in that silence, something stirred. A quiet voice in the back of the lobby. It wasn't loud. It wasn't panicked. It was calm, steady, and carried the weight of understanding. At first, Carter thought he imagined it. But then he realized it was Mandarin. Clear, fluent, perfect Mandarin. His eyes darted toward the source, and there he saw him, the janitor, the man in a plain uniform, holding a mop, the man Carter had barely ever noticed, the man who now spoke, the very words that no one else could. For a brief moment, the entire lobby froze. Carter's heart skipped a beat. The struggle was about to take a turn no one expected. The lobby, once filled with whispers and tension, now fell into complete silence. Every head turned in the same direction, searching for the voice that had just cut through the storm. The sound had been calm, respectful, and smooth. Mandarin. Not broken, not robotic, but natural. Like music. Carter blinked, almost in disbelief. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on someone he never would have expected. It was James. James, the janitor. The man in the navy blue uniform with worn shoes and a mop in his hand. The man who usually worked quietly in the background, sweeping floors, wiping glass doors, and carrying trash bags. He had always been invisible in the grand halls of the hotel, but now, standing with his mop bucket beside him, James was the center of attention. "Nin hao, 有什么问题吗?" James repeated gently, his voice low but steady. The Mandarin flowed from his mouth effortlessly, as if he had been speaking it his entire life. Mr. Lee's stern expression shifted, his brows lifted in surprise, his lips parting slightly. Then, for the first time since entering the hotel, the millionaire's eyes softened. He turned toward James and responded quickly, his words rolling fast, filled with relief. The assistants, too, were caught off guard. Their serious faces flickered with curiosity. They leaned forward, listening closely. A janitor, a man they had not even noticed when they walked in, was suddenly speaking their language with perfect fluency. Carter's jaw dropped. His mind couldn't keep up with what his eyes were seeing and his ears were hearing. The janitor? The janitor knew Mandarin? And not just a few words, not phrases from a phone app, but real, confident, natural Mandarin. The guests in the lobby began to murmur. Some leaned over to one another, whispering. Others simply stared, their eyes wide with disbelief. The receptionist, who had been on the edge of tears moments ago, placed a hand over her mouth. She couldn't hide her amazement. James, meanwhile, remained calm. He set his mop aside and stepped a little closer to Mr. Lee, bowing politely in the respectful Chinese way. Then he listened carefully to the millionaire's request. His face showed no panic, no fear, only quiet confidence. When Mr. Lee finished speaking, James nodded and translated smoothly into English for Carter and the staff. He says he has a reservation for the presidential suite. He wants to confirm the changes he requested last week, an extra meeting room and special meal arrangements. For his stay, the words came out clear, simple, and direct. For the first time that morning, Carter actually understood. He blinked again, still stunned, and quickly gave instructions to the receptionist to confirm the booking. Mr. Lee continued, speaking in Mandarin again, his tone now lighter. James listened attentively, then translated once more. He also says he is allergic to peanuts, so he must avoid any food cooked with peanut oil, and he would like fresh fruit delivered every morning to his room. The staff scrambled to take notes, nodding eagerly. Carter repeated the instructions, his voice almost shaking, not from fear this time, but from relief. The impossible wall of language that had trapped them only minutes ago had been shattered by the janitor. Mr. Lee smiled. Now, a real smile, warm and approving. He chuckled softly in Mandarin and patted James on the arm. The assistants relaxed too, their stern faces easing into quiet respect. The mood in the lobby shifted like night into day. Guests who had been frowning now smiled. Staff members who had been frozen with shame now breathed again. The heavy tension dissolved, replaced by amazement. And in the middle of it all, James stood tall, not as the man with a mop, but as the man who had saved the day. Carter watched, his face burning with mixed emotions. Part of him was grateful, beyond words. Another part of him was ashamed. For years, James had been invisible in his eyes, just a janitor. And yet, here he was, speaking Mandarin like a scholar, connecting with a millionaire in a way no one else in the hotel could. Carter swallowed hard, his pride crumbling.
He realized that in all his training, in all his striving for perfection, he had overlooked one of the most valuable people in his hotel, the janitor. And now, the entire lobby knew it. The moment James began to translate, the air inside the hotel,
lobby seemed to breathe again. The heavy silence that had been choking everyone slowly lifted, replaced by the soft rhythm of Mandarin flowing back and forth between James and Mr. Li. Mr. Li leaned slightly forward as James spoke, his eyes bright with curiosity and relief. The billionaire's lips curved into a smile every time James translated perfectly, without hesitation, without a stumble. It was the kind of smile a man gave when he finally felt understood in a foreign land. For the first time since entering the hotel, Mr. Li laughed, a deep, warm laugh that filled the entire lobby. Guests turned to look, some smiling in return, others shaking their heads in amazement. Only minutes earlier, the atmosphere had felt like a storm. Now it felt like sunlight had broken through the clouds. 你中文说得非常好. Mr. Li said, his tone filled with admiration. James bowed his head politely and answered, 谢谢您, 先生. 我在中国生活了很多年. Thank you, sir. I lived in China for many years. The assistants exchanged quick glances, clearly impressed. Their serious expressions softened, their arms uncrossed. They now looked at James not as a cleaner with a mop, but as a man of culture, someone worthy of respect. James continued to listen carefully to Mr. Li's needs, translating every detail for Carter and the staff. He explained the special arrangements, the meeting schedules, the dietary restrictions. Each sentence he spoke carried clarity and dignity, as if he had been born to stand in that moment. Carter stood nearby, stunned into silence. He had managed hotels for years, handled countless VIPs and faced dozens of challenges. But nothing had humbled him more than watching his janitor, the man he had never paid much attention to, command the respect of a millionaire. Every fluent word that left James's mouth was like a mirror reflecting Carter's own blindness. Guests who had gathered to watch whispered softly among themselves. Is he the janitor? One asked. Yes, I've seen him cleaning the windows last week, another replied. But listen to him. It's like he's lived in China his whole life. The whispers only grew, carrying a mixture of shock, admiration, and respect.
Meanwhile, James was no longer just translating words, he was building a bridge. His voice carried warmth and his eyes carried understanding. He didn't just translate. He connected. He nodded at the right moments, smiled politely, and even added small, respectful phrases in Mandarin that made Mr. Li feel at ease, almost as if he were back home. Mr. Li reached out and shook James's hand firmly. Ni rang wo gandao bin jirugui, he said. You make me feel at home. The millionaires. Words hung in the air like a blessing. Carter felt them deep in his chest. He could almost feel the eyes of the entire lobby turning toward James, recognizing him not as the janitor anymore, but as the savior of the day. James bowed again, humbly replying, 欢迎您来到我们的酒店，先生. Welcome to our hotel, sir. At that moment, even the chandeliers seemed to shine brighter. The panic and shame of earlier melted away, replaced by a calm pride. But not for Carter, not for the assistant managers. The pride now belonged to James. The staff, who had once avoided eye contact, now looked at James with wide eyes. The receptionist, who had nearly broken down with nerves, gave him a small, grateful smile. The bellboy, still holding the luggage cart, nodded his head in silent respect. Carter's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, to thank James, but the words caught in his chest. Instead, he simply watched as Mr. Li and the janitor continued their effortless exchange, two men from different worlds, now bound by language and mutual respect. In that moment, it was clear. The connection had been made. The deal, the trust, the reputation, it was all saved, not by the manager in his polished suit, but by the janitor with a mop. And the lobby, filled with people who had witnessed it, would never forget the sound of their perfect conversation. The handshake between James and Mr. Li lingered in the minds of everyone who saw it. For the millionaire, it was a gesture of gratitude. For the staff, it was a moment of revelation. But for Carter, the manager, it felt like a heavy stone pressing on his chest. He stood frozen behind the counter, watching as James, the janitor, he had barely ever noticed, spoke to the hotel's most important guest with ease and dignity. Every fluent phrase of Mandarin was like a reminder of Carter's own failure. He, the manager with the suit and the polished shoes, had panicked, and James, the man in the faded uniform, had stepped forward with calm strength. Mr. Lee turned to Carter and through James's translation said, "This man understands me. He respects my culture. Because of him, I feel welcome here." The word struck Carter like a blade. His forced smile wavered, his pride cracked, and his throat tightened with shame. All morning he had been terrified of failing in front of Mr. Lee. And now he had failed anyway, not because he was rude or careless, but because he had overlooked the value of someone standing right beside him. He thought back to all the times he had walked past James in the hallways without even saying, "Hello?" He remembered giving instructions about cleaning schedules without once asking about James's life. To him, James had always been just the janitor, invisible, replaceable. But now, Carter saw the truth. James carried a depth and wisdom he had never taken the time to see. The staff felt it too. The receptionist, who had once avoided eye contact, now watched James with admiration. The bellboy, who had stood awkwardly during the chaos, gave James a respectful nod. Even the assistant managers, embarrassed by their failed attempts with the phrasebook, stepped back silently, acknowledging that the janitor had succeeded where they could not. The entire balance of the lobby had shifted. The man who once mopped the floors was now standing taller than everyone else, not in height but in respect. Mr. Lee laughed warmly at something James said. He placed a hand on James's shoulder and spoke in Mandarin, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. James smiled back modestly, translating for Carter. "He says he is grateful for your hospitality, but especially grateful for me helping him feel understood." Carter's cheeks burned. He forced himself to nod. "Yes, yes, of course," he said weakly. His voice lacked the strength it once carried. The manager who always demanded perfection now felt small, humbled before his own staff. Inside his mind, Carter's thoughts swirled painfully. How many talents have I ignored? How many people have I looked down on because of their uniforms, their jobs, their silence? He realized now how blind he had been. Respect was not earned by position or title. It was earned by character, by action, by humanity. The guests in the lobby too sensed the change. They whispered among themselves, pointing subtly at James. Some even smiled at him, nodding in admiration. The story of what had happened was already beginning to spread, carried on the lips of everyone who had witnessed it. For the first time in his life, Carter felt not like a leader, but like a student. And the man teaching him this lesson was someone he had once dismissed without a thought. James, however, showed no pride, no arrogance. He bowed respectfully to Mr. Lee, then quietly stepped back, as if ready to return to his mop and bucket. But the respect in the lobby followed him. He could not become invisible again. Carter swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. "James," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. "Thank you. Truly. Thank you." James glanced at him, offering only a humble nod, before turning back to finish his work. And in that moment, Carter knew. The hierarchy of the hotel had shifted forever. The millionaire had praised not the manager, not the assistants, but the janitor. And in doing so, he revealed the truth that Carter had ignored for years. Greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The shift was complete. The lobby would never look at James the same way again. When the conversation ended, Mr. Lee clasped James's hand once more. This time, the handshake was longer, warmer, and full of meaning. "Ni," Mr. Lee said slowly in English, pointing at James. "You are the reason I stay here." The words carried across the lobby like a bell. Everyone heard them. Everyone felt them. James bowed politely, replying in Mandarin with quiet humility. "Huan ying nin guang lin. Neng bang dao nin shi wo de rongxing." Welcome. It is my honor to help you. The assistants gathered Mr. Lee's luggage and the group prepared to head toward the elevators. But before leaving, Mr. Lee turned back once more, giving James a respectful nod. To a man of his stature, such a gesture meant more than gold. The moment the elevator doors closed behind the millionaire, the lobby exhaled. The tension that had hung in the air all morning dissolved completely, replaced by whispers, smiles, and glances toward James. For the first time, the janitor was not invisible. The receptionist clapped softly, her eyes shining with admiration. The bellboy muttered, "Unbelievable," shaking his head with a smile. Even guests who had only stopped by for coffee leaned over, whispering to one another about the janitor who spoke perfect Mandarin. James, however, did not bask in the attention. He simply picked up his mop, rolling his bucket back into place. His face remained calm, almost shy, as if what he had done was nothing at all. But his quiet humility only deepened the respect around him. Carter, the manager, stood frozen. His emotions battled inside. Gratitude, shame, relief, and something else he had not felt in years. Respect. He had worn his authority like armor for so long, but today it had cracked. And through that crack he saw the truth clearly. Slowly, Carter stepped forward. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he approached James. The entire staff watched, holding their breath. The manager, who had once ignored the janitor, now faced him directly. "James," Carter said softly, his voice unsteady. "Today, you saved us. No, you saved me. I owe you more than I can say." James looked at him quietly, then gave a small smile. "I only did what I could, sir." But Carter shook his head. "No, you did what none of us could. You gave respect when we had none to give. You made him feel at home. And because of that, he will trust us." His eyes lowered for a moment, and I will never forget it. The staff, hearing these words, felt the weight of the moment. A new kind of respect was being born, not just from Carter, but from everyone who had seen what happened. James nodded once more, humbly, before turning back to his work. But his quiet dignity spoke louder than any words could. That evening, when the shift ended, James walked home in his same navy blue uniform. The streets outside were busy, cars honking, people rushing past. To anyone else, he looked like just another working man, tired from a long day. But inside, James carried something new. He carried the memory of a millionaire's handshake, the sound of Mandarin flowing like music, and the knowledge that for once the world had seen him. Not the mop, not the uniform, not the job title, but him. He unlocked the door to his small apartment, placing his bag by the chair. He sat down quietly, staring at the window where the evening light poured in. For years he had lived in silence, his skills hidden, his past forgotten. But today reminded him that nothing learned was ever wasted, and no one, no matter how overlooked, was ever truly invisible. Back at the hotel, Carter stayed late, sitting alone in his office. He replayed the day in his mind, the panic, the shame, the shift, and finally the ending. He realized that leadership was not about knowing everything. It was about seeing the people who stood beside you, even those you thought were ordinary. Especially those you thought were ordinary.